What if I told you that the very blood running through royal veins wasn't blue but poisoned? That behind the glittering crowns and marble palaces lay a horrifying truth. Entire dynasties were slowly destroying themselves, one generation at a time, all in the name of keeping power pure. Today we're diving into the chilling world of history's most mentally afflicted royal women, queens and princesses whose minds shattered under the weight of centuries of genetic manipulation. These aren't just tales of madness, they're cautionary stories of what happens when ambition overrides humanity. By the time we reach our final entry, you'll understand why some bloodlines were destined to end in screams. Number 10. Princess Alexandra of Bavaria, the woman who swallowed a piano. Starting our countdown is Princess Alexandra of Bavaria, born in 1826 into a family tree that looked more like a twisted vine. Her great-great-grandparents were siblings, her grandparents were first cousins, and her parents, they shared enough DNA to make modern geneticists weep. Alexandra's madness wasn't subtle. She became convinced she had swallowed a glass piano as a child and spent her entire adult life walking sideways, believing the instrument would shatter if she moved normally. But here's the truly chilling part. She wasn't alone. Her brother Otto became so violently insane he had to be locked away, and her nephew Ludwig II would later drown under mysterious circumstances after being declared mentally unfit. The Bavarian royals had been intermarrying for so long that madness became their family heirloom, passed down more reliably than their crown jewels. Number 9. Infanta Margarita Teresa of Spain, the living doll. Born in 1651, Margarita Teresa was the product of an uncle-niece marriage that shocked even the scandal-hardened Spanish court. Her father, Philip IV, married his own brother's daughter, creating a genetic nightmare wrapped in royal silk. Immortalized in Velázquez's haunting paintings, Margarita appears almost ethereal, but not in a good way. Court records describe her as unnaturally pale, with eyes that seemed to see through reality itself. She spoke to invisible courtiers, insisted on wearing her dead mother's clothes, and would spend hours staring at mirrors, convinced her reflection was plotting against her. Married off to her first cousin at age 15, she bore 4 children before dying at just 21. Her autopsy revealed organs so malformed that doctors couldn't explain how she'd lived as long as she did. Her genetic legacy was so toxic that her surviving daughter would become the last of the Spanish Habsburg line. Number 8. Princess Sophia Dorothea of Chell, the prisoner of passion. Born in 1666, Sophia Dorothea's story reads like a Gothic thriller. The daughter of a morganatic marriage, she was already genetically compromised when she was forced to marry her first cousin, the future King George I of England. But Sophia Dorothea had a secret. She was desperately in love with a Swedish count named Philip von Königsmark. Their affair became legendary, but when it was discovered, the count mysteriously vanished. Some say he was murdered and buried beneath the palace floorboards. Others believe he was thrown into a lime pit. Sophia Dorothea, she was imprisoned in a castle for the remaining 32 years of her life, forbidden from seeing her children, forbidden from remarrying, forbidden from existing as anything more than a living ghost. She spent her days writing letters to her dead lover and talking to painted portraits as if they were alive. The isolation drove her to complete madness. By the end, she was found speaking in tongues, convinced she was communicating with spirits from beyond the grave. Number 7. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, the anorexic wanderer. Born in 1837, Elizabeth, known as Sisi, was Bavaria's gift to the Austrian Empire. But this gift came with a devastating genetic price tag. Her parents were first cousins, and her family tree was so tangled that she essentially married into her own extended family. Sisi's madness manifested as an obsessive need for perfection. She exercised for hours daily, weighed herself constantly, and ate so little that her waist measured just 16 inches. But her true insanity lay in her compulsive traveling. She couldn't stay in one place for more than a few days without feeling like the walls were closing in. She wandered across Europe like a beautiful specter, speaking to no one, eating nothing, slowly wasting away. Court physicians recorded that she would sometimes go days without speaking, standing motionless in front of mirrors, pinching her skin until it bled. Her son's suicide in 1889 finally broke what remained of her fragile mind. She began wearing only black, refused all photographs, and covered her face with fans and veils. When an Italian anarchist stabbed her to death in 1898, some say she welcomed the blade like an old friend. Number 6. Queen Maria I of Portugal, the Screaming Queen. Maria III, born in 1734, was the result of generations of careful inbreeding designed to keep the Portuguese crown pure. Her parents were uncle and niece, her grandparents were first cousins, and she herself married her uncle, her own father's brother. The genetic toll was catastrophic. Maria gave birth to 7 children, but only 3 survived past infancy. The others died of mysterious illnesses that baffled court physicians. But it was Maria herself who paid the heaviest price. Starting in her 50s, she began experiencing what witnesses described as episodes of divine terror. She would scream that she was damned, that devils were coming for her, that the walls were bleeding. Her screams were so piercing that they could be heard throughout the palace, earning her the nickname Maria the Mad. During her worst episodes, she had to be physically restrained. She would claw at her own face, convinced that insects were crawling beneath her skin. The royal physicians tried everything: bloodletting, ice baths, even primitive shock therapy, but nothing worked. For the last 24 years of her life, she was essentially a prisoner in her own palace, locked away while her son ruled in her name. She died in 1816, her final words reportedly being, the fire is coming for all of us." Number 5. Empress Carlota of Mexico, the Mad Woman of Miramar. Born Princess Charlotte of Belgium in 1840, Carlota was the product of a royal marriage between first cousins. But her true descent into madness began when she married Archduke Maximilian of Austria and accepted the cursed crown of Mexico. When Maximilian was executed by firing squad in 1867, something in Carlota's mind simply snapped. She became convinced that everyone was trying to poison her. Her food, her water, even the air she breathed. She would only eat eggs that she cracked herself and drink milk that she watched being drawn from the cow. But her paranoia went deeper. She believed that invisible assassins were hiding in the walls of her castle, Miramar, waiting to strike. She would spend hours each day checking locks, testing windows, searching for hidden passages that existed only in her fractured mind. For the next 60 years, until her death in 1927, she lived as a recluse, convinced that the world outside her castle had ended. She would speak to portraits of her dead husband, set places at dinner for guests who never came, and write letters to foreign governments that had ceased to exist. Number 4. Queen Isabella of Castile, the Inquisitor's daughter. Born in 1451, Isabella was the product of a marriage between second cousins, but her real tragedy lay in what she became. The woman who would sponsor Columbus's voyages and unite Spain also unleashed one of history's most brutal religious purges. Isabella's madness took the form of religious obsession so extreme, it bordered on the supernatural. She became convinced that God spoke to her directly, commanding her to cleanse Spain of all non-Christians. She would spend hours in her private chapel, flagellating herself until she bled, believing that physical pain brought her closer to divine truth. But it was her treatment of her own daughter, Juana, that revealed the true depth of her psychological damage. When Juana showed signs of mental illness, Isabella locked her away, declaring her possessed by demons. She subjected her own child to exorcisms so violent that Juana's screams could be heard throughout the palace. The genetic legacy Isabella passed down was one of madness and fanaticism. Her daughter Juana would become known as Juana the Mad, and her great-granddaughter would be the infamous Bloody Mary of England. Number 3. Electress Sophia of Hanover, the Philosopher of Death. Born in 1630, Sophia was the product of generations of strategic inbreeding among German royalty. Her parents were first cousins, and her own marriage to her first cousin created a genetic disaster that would echo through European history. Sophia's madness manifested as an obsession with death in the afterlife. She collected detailed accounts of executions, had artists paint her in various stages of decomposition, and insisted on attending every funeral in her territory. Her private rooms were filled with skulls, coffins, and memento mori. But her true insanity lay in her philosophical writings. She penned thousands of pages of increasingly incoherent treatises on death, believing she had unlocked the secrets of the universe through her contemplation of mortality. She claimed to have regular conversations with deceased philosophers and insisted that the dead were more alive than the living. Her genetic legacy was catastrophic. Her son would become King George I of England, founding a dynasty plagued by madness, including the famous Mad King George III. Number 2, Queen Juana of Castile, the mad queen who couldn't let go. Born in 1479, Juana was the daughter of Isabel of Castile and inherited both a crown and a curse. The product of centuries of careful inbreeding, she was genetically predisposed to madness, but it was love that finally broke her mind. Juana's obsession with her husband, Philip the Handsome, was legendary. When he died suddenly in 1506, she refused to believe he was gone. She had his coffin opened repeatedly to kiss his corpse, convinced that her love could bring him back to life. For months, she traveled across Spain with his decomposing body, stopping at convents and churches, demanding that nuns pray for his resurrection. She would sleep next to his coffin, whispering to him as if he could hear her. When maggots began to fall from the casket, she collected them in a velvet bag, believing they were sacred. Her father, Ferdinand, used her madness as an excuse to imprison her for the next 46 years. She spent the rest of her life in a small tower room, convinced that Philip would return for her. She died in 1555, still clutching a lock of his hair. Number 1, Cleopatra VII. Philopator, the last pharaoh's genetic nightmare. At the top of our list stands the most famous queen in history, but not the glamorous Hollywood version. The real Cleopatra VII, born in 69 BCE, was the product of 300 years of Ptolemaic inbreeding so extreme it defied biological logic. Her family tree wasn't a tree at all, it was a genetic circle. Her parents were siblings, her grandparents were siblings, and she herself married 2 of her own brothers in succession. The Ptolemies had been intermarrying for so long that Cleopatra had virtually no genetic diversity left. The effects were catastrophic. Historical accounts describe her as having seizures, violent mood swings, and periods of complete mental absence. She would sometimes speak in tongues, claiming to be possessed by the spirits of her ancestors. Her famous beauty was likely a propaganda creation. Contemporary accounts describe her as having bulging eyes, a receding chin, and a hooked nose. But it was her final years that revealed her true madness. Convinced that Rome was coming to destroy not just her kingdom, but reality itself, she began experimenting with poisons on condemned prisoners, searching for the perfect death. She became obsessed with the idea that dying beautifully was the only way to achieve immortality. When Octavian's forces finally arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra's grip on reality had completely shattered. She believed that by dying with her beloved asp, she would be transformed into a goddess and rule over the dead. Her final act wasn't suicide. In her fractured mind, it was transcendence. The genetic legacy of royal madness. These 10 women represent more than just individual tragedies. They're the living proof of what happens when power becomes more important than humanity. Their stories span 2,000 years of history, from ancient Egypt to modern Europe, but they all share one horrifying common thread. They were sacrificed on the altar of genetic purity. Their madness wasn't accidental, it was inevitable. Generation after generation of carefully planned inbreeding had created bloodlines so compromised that madness became hereditary. Each woman inherited not just a crown, but a curse written in her very DNA. Today we look back at these queens and princesses with a mixture of horror and pity. They were some of the most powerful women in history, yet they were also victims of a system that valued bloodline over well-being, tradition over truth. Their stories serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes the price of power is sanity itself. In trying to keep their blood pure, royal families created something far more dangerous than diluted lineages. They created monsters wrapped in silk and crowned with gold. The next time you see a fairy tale about a beautiful princess, remember these women. Behind every crown lies a shadow, and behind every royal bloodline lies a genetic time bomb, ticking away through the generations, waiting to explode in madness, misery, and death.